We want to welcome you this afternoon to the Joint Seapower and Projection Forces and Coast Guard and Maritime Transportation hearing on Naval Cooperative Strategy. We thank our witnesses for being here. Normally we would have opening statements by the chairman and ranking members of both committees or subcommittees, but today all of the chairman and ranking members have agreed to waive their opening remarks. They will be placed in the record. Mr. Courtney, that's my understanding, and Mr. Hunter, it is as well. So we're delighted today to have three very distinguished witnesses to appear before our joint hearing. We have Vice Admiral Charles Michael, U.S. Coast Guard, the Deputy Commandant for Operations, Major General Andrew O'Donnell, the U.S. Marine Corps Assistant Deputy Commandant, Combat Development and Integration, Deputy Commanding General, Marine Corps Combat Development Command, and Rear Admiral Kevin Donegan, U.S. Navy Acting Deputy Chief of Naval Operations for Operations, Plans, and Strategy. Gentlemen, we want to thank you for your work on this strategy. You've done a great job. We look forward to hearing your comments. We will put your full testimony in the record, but we'd love to have you take 5 minutes or so to summarize it in any way that you would like to do so. And so I don't know which of you would like to start off, but we're going to turn the floor over. Admiral, we're going to recognize you now and look forward to your comments.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Forbes, Chairman Hunter, Ranking Member Courtney, and distinguished members of the committees, good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to testify today on the Coast Guard's role in the cooperative strategy for 21st century sea power, forward, engaged, ready. With the committee's permission, I also propose to enter the strategy document itself into the record. The Coast Guard stands ready alongside the Navy and Marine Corps, reaffirming our unified commitment to confront national security threats from and on the sea. The Coast Guard is a member of the nation's 5 armed services and a global maritime force that complements the other sea services roles in fulfilling the nation's broad maritime goals. The Coast Guard leverages unique authorities, capabilities, and partnerships essential to national and homeland security. The Coast Guard is, at all times, an armed service under Title 10 and simultaneously has broad law enforcement authorities under Title 14. The Coast Guard provides its greatest contributions to the collective strategy in the critical areas of maritime security operations, all-domain access, and maintaining flexible, agile, and ready forces. Maritime security operations protect sovereignty and maritime resources, support free and open seaborne commerce, and deter and counter threats that seek to exploit the maritime domain, including weapons proliferation, terrorism, transnational crime, piracy, sanctions avoidance, and unlawful seaborne migration. As the Navy and Marine Corps rebalance efforts to address national imperatives in the Asia-Pacific region, Coast Guard operations projected forward in the Western Hemisphere Transit Zone increase in importance. The Coast Guard's Offshore Patrol Cutter, or OPC, acquisition is the key service recapitalization to maintain our forward deployed complementary non-redundant capability in combating transnational criminal networks, the greatest threat to national security in this hemisphere. These assets can't arrive too soon. Our medium endurance cutters currently on scene, which annually interdict more than 3 times the amount of cocaine seized domestically and at every air, land, and sea border of the United States, will be 55 years old on average when the first OPC deploys to the Western Hemisphere Transit Zone. The Coast Guard also plays a unique role in achieving all-domain access. The Coast Guard's ability to operate in polar regions ensures the nation's maritime security interests are met in increasingly strategic Arctic Ocean as well as in Antarctica. Through its unique authorities and international partnerships, the Coast Guard has an active maritime security presence in 29 countries and has 60 bilateral agreements with foreign governments that enhance maritime governance, rule of law, and global leadership. In the cyber domain, Coast Guard authorities and responsibilities span the .mil, .gov, and .com domains. To accomplish the collective goals of this strategy, it is imperative for our forces to remain flexible, agile, and ready. Critical to remaining forward, on call, and ready 24/7 to engage in a strategic and complementary manner are investments in the OPC acquisition, improved aviation capabilities, integrated command and control systems, and a proficient workforce. In conclusion, the Coast Guard is fully committed to the strategic priorities of the strategy and remains a forward, engaged, and ready member of our sea services across the globe and at the strategic, operational, and tactical levels. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today and for all you do for the men and women of the nation's armed forces and specifically its sea services. I look forward to answering your questions.
Admiral Schell, thank you so much for your testimony, for being here with us today. General, we now recognize you.
Thanks, sir. Chairman Forbes, Ranking Member Courtney, Chairman Hunter, Ranking Member Garamendi, and distinguished
General,
members.
you might want to pull that mic just a little closer. Sometimes it's difficult picking up.
Thanks. The Marine Corps' ability to serve as the nation's premier crisis response force is due in large part to this subcommittee's continued strong support. And on behalf of all Marines, I thank you. Admiral Michel highlighted some key points from the cooperative strategy of the 21st century Seapower, and I'd like to briefly highlight the role your Marine Corps as an element of U.S. power. When it comes to being where it matters, when it matters, the Marine Corps is committed to keeping our force forward deployed and forward engaged. This means that today there are around 30,000 Marines deployed in over 40 countries. These forces are currently conducting strikes in Syria and Iraq, training the Iraqi army, and protecting our embassy in Baghdad. They also include 22,500 Marines in the Pacific, all of which are west of the international date line. These forces are conducting exercises and training with our Pacific partners and are staged to rapidly respond to any crisis or contingency in the region. As Admiral Donegan will mention, this strategy recognizes that we will continue to invest in strengthening alliances and also partnerships. Marines deployed onboard amphibious ships and those forces forward station routinely conduct theater security cooperation, exercises to ensure interoperability and enhance our partners' capabilities. There is no substitute for the mission, and as this committee has heard before, virtual presence is actual absence. This strategy paints a path forward in operating in an increasingly complex environment. It complements and amplifies the characteristics required of the Marine Corps and our capstone concept, Expeditionary Force 21. In doing so, it highlights the importance of naval forces in gaining and maintaining overseas access in peace or war. Your Navy Marine Corps team provides the United States the ability to project sustainable combat power overseas without the need to ask for assistance or permission from anyone. This capability is essential to protecting our citizens, advancing our national interest, and promoting global stability. Today's security environments, as well as the challenges, constrained and uncertain budgets, require creative responses to fulfill our global commitments. Our forward stationed and deployed Marines remain our nation's 911 force in readiness, and this strategy will ensure that they remain poised to do so in the future. Thank you for your opportunity to be here today, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, General. Admiral Donegan.
Chairman Forbes, Ranking Member Courtney, Chairman Hunter, Ranking Member Garamendi, distinguished members, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today with my shipmates from the Marine Corps and Coast Guard to discuss this Sea Services Cooperative Strategy for 21st Century Seapower. With the permission of the subcommittee, I propose to keep my remarks brief, but have submitted a separate statement for the Department of the Navy that the General.
All of their remarks will be so ordered it'll be put in the record. Thank you.
Thank you. Now offer a brief overview of the strategy and then touch on some of the, just a few of the highlights. First, the Cooperative Strategy for 21st Century Seapower, Forward, Engaged, and Ready, explains how we will build and employ the naval forces in support of national security interests. It describes a force built and ready for any challenge from high-end warfight to humanitarian operations. Now, the strategy was revised mainly due to changes in the geopolitical landscape since 2007, including threats from violent extremist organizations like the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, evolving threats from North Korea and Iran, potential opportunities and challenges with a rising China, and recent Russian aggression in the Ukraine. Additionally, we face new and evolving challenges that threaten our access in cyberspace and the global commons. We have also sought to align our maritime strategy to new national strategic guidance and are very aware of the impact of changes in the current fiscal environment. Most importantly, this strategy describes a sea power that is critical for our nation and our global economy. The strategy is underpinned by a Navy, naval services with combat credible forward presence that will be where it matters when it matters, and our continued commitment to our allies and partners. We will also continue to meet the historic naval functions of deterrence, sea control, power projection, and maritime security. But our strategy has adapted, starting with an emphasis on warfighting first In addition, we describe a new function, all-domain access, that focuses on maintaining the access we need to be where it matters when it matters. The strategy balances the disposition of our forces and capabilities against regional threats. It also embraces innovation and efficiency in building a modern and capable force of more than 300 ships that will overcome any challenge to our ability to fight and win. Several key takeaways from the strategy include warfighting first. Defending our nation and winning its wars is a core task of the U.S. Navy and U.S. Marine Corps. Due to varied threats we face as a nation, the sea services, the U.S. Navy, Marine Corps, and Coast Guard, together with other services, must have the capabilities and capacity to defeat any adversary and defend the homeland while honoring our alliances worldwide. Where it matters, when it matters, means that operating forward, we will provide the President options to defend our interests, deter and de-escalate hostilities, respond to crises, and keep conflict far from our shores. The naval services also protect the strength of our U.S. economy by globally deploying that combat-credible power to ensure the unimpeded flow of commerce. We recognize one of our advantages as a nation and a Navy has been our extensive networks of alliances, partnerships, and coalitions. By leveraging the robust capabilities of naval forces worldwide, we're better postured to collectively face new and emerging challenges in the 21st century. Accordingly, we're going to look for new ways to enhance relationships and form partnerships with traditional and non-traditional maritime partners who share a stake in international commerce, safety, security, and freedom of the seas. Our new essential function, all-domain access, will ensure that we organize, train, and equip to overcome threats and assure access and freedom of action in any domain to enable us to fight and win should war be inescapable. Our strategy also continues the efforts to rebalance forces to the Asia-Pacific. Evolving challenges in the region, including the recent activities of China's Navy and the proliferation of anti-access area denial technologies, require that we maintain a leading role in that region. Our force design construct ensures our capability and capacity to support global presence requirements. In building the future force, we're going to balance investments in a flexible, agile force while appropriately developing our people as well as the operational concepts and capabilities to remain capable and combat ready. Finally, I will note that the new strategy is not the end of our work. It's part of a larger effort throughout the Navy to energize our existing culture of strategic thinking that has led to innovation and an increase in operational excellence. This has already been instrumental in aligning our budget requirements and operational concepts. The strategic continuum will also align our strategic documents, will oversee iterative wargaming, new concept development, and further increase those strategic linkages to the budget. In closing, our foremost priority remains the security and prosperity of our nation, the American people, and our way of life. The strategy ensures that the Navy, Marine Corps, and Coast Guard remain forward, engaged, and ready to continue protecting American citizens and advancing U.S. interests as we have done for more than 2 centuries. Thank you.
Admiral, thank you. And since we have a joint hearing today and a lot of members who want to ask questions, I'm going to defer my questions to the Vice Chairman of the Seapower and Projection Forces Subcommittee and the Chairman of the T&I Coast Guard Maritime Transportation Subcommittee, Mr. Hunter from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess my first question or first comment is, I'm on the Armed Services Committee too. We don't see the Coast Guard in here very often. I mean, it's kind of a strange thing that you're not in here more often, but it's good that you are at the same time. I guess the first question I have is about the Arctic. You guys talk about the Arctic. There's no plans to get an icebreaker unless the Navy buys in, and unless there's a whole of government approach. We're probably not going to have an icebreaker. We're not going to buy one. We're going to have to lease one, but at the very least, I'd like to know what the Navy buy-in is, and if the Navy really, do we care about the Arctic? And if we don't, that's fine. And if we do, what are we doing about it?
Sir, clearly you directed that at the Navy. From our, this strategy clearly talks about the Arctic. It talks about it in a couple ways. We address it in relation to climate change and...
Admiral, let me be more specific. You need an icebreaker to get up there and break ice to be able to operate there. So I don't care about the climate change stuff at all, frankly. I'm curious about the actual icebreaker and acquiring a ship that can break ice to get the Navy and the Marine Corps and whoever else up there, or having to save somebody if you had to.
Yes, sir. As you know, that the different missions and focuses are given to different services and different organizations. The U.S. Coast Guard was given the responsibility for the National Icebreaking Mission, so we're working closely with the Coast Guard as we identify the operating requirements and capabilities needed for future icebreakers. We absolutely agree in the future that we're going to need to be up there more than we are today. From the Navy side, we're increasing the exercises we do up there in our research so we understand that domain. But we do agree that in the future we're going to need to be up there more often.
Okay. The Coast Guard's budget is minuscule compared to yours. The Coast Guard's budget also got cut by the President by 26%, just their acquisition budget. So they're not going to be able to make the ships that they need going back about 10 years, let alone a $400 million icebreaker, $400 million to $1 billion icebreaker. So it's going to take Navy money. It's going to take something like that.
Sir, as you know, we have the Navy has its own challenges in the shipbuilding account, and it's adding an icebreaker, not being something that was tasked to the Navy to do, would only pressurize our accounts further. But I fully understand your point of view, sir. And
so you all recognize the mission. You're right about the Arctic, but really don't have any way to get up there or do anything there. We just say it's important.
Sir, for us, as we talk about in this strategy, we talk about when we need to be up there and for what missions that we have. And for the portion that I was going to mention a little bit earlier was our Arctic roadmap lays out for us how we're going to do that and when in the future we believe we have to be there more than we do today. And you're right, sir. As a country, we have to figure out and make sure that we have that access as those areas open up for us to move about and commerce starts to travel the routes that we know are opening now, beginning to open now.
That's all I have. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it.
Mr. Courtney is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And like Chairman Hunter, it is a pleasure to see the Coast Guard here in the room today. Last time Mr. Whitman and I were over in Brunei, we were touring the Fifth Fleet ships that were tied up there, and all of a sudden we saw two white hulls there, and actually had a great visit on board the ship. The captain, of course, was trained at the Coast Guard Academy in New London, but frankly, it was nothing but high praise from the Navy partners in terms of the work that the Coast Guard was doing in that mission. And obviously, this report, really is just a confirmation of what's really happening. This isn't just sort of talk that we're hearing about today. I just really have one question, which is about the Sea Lift and Logistics Force piece of the puzzle that you guys are working on here. I think you agree that this is a vital piece of our ability to execute the national military strategy, regardless of area of responsibility. Given the age of the Ready Reserve Fleet and its need for recapitalization, coupled with the fragility of the maritime security program, what measures are being taken to ensure that we will have a viable and stable sea lift and logistics fleet in order to execute this new maritime strategy? And anyone who wants to take that question, the floor is yours.
Well, sir, I think I'll take it first and then see if there's others. I think you'll see in the strategy that strategic sea lift is a key element of the Sea Service's ability to sustain forward operations. In particular, in the strategy, what we talk about is it's expected that the naval services can establish a sea base, and from that sea base, we need to be able to do what it is that we need to do, whether that be project power, whether it be to launch the Marines ashore on an amphibious operation, or to just have the presence that we need to have in the area. Critical to that is being able to sustain that sea base, and that comes through a combination, as you know, of the Combat Logistics Force and also the Maritime Security Program and the other methods we use to support that force. Aerial refueling, for example, is another method. So we absolutely agree that it's a requirement. What we're working on now is defining. We understand the MSP program, for instance, is under pressure, especially as we move forward to the future. We understand that combat logistics forces that we have right now, we have to look at them closely. We've just completed a study on the combat logistics force piece of the question that told us that we have enough of the combat logistics force to sustain our operations in peacetime. And what we're going to do in the coming months is continue that work through our iterative wargaming process, where we look at the sea lift, military sea lift security program and the combat logistics forces and ensure that for each of the war plans that we have and the other future operations, that we have a method to be able to continue to sustain that sea base. It's absolutely essential that we do that, and we need to continue to make sure we have that in the future as some of these programs come under pressure.
Mr. Garamendi, I know you were detained and got here just a few minutes after we started, but we also have recognized we put all of our opening remarks in the record, and yours will be placed in the record. And Mr. Garamendi is the ranking member of the subcommittee, so we now recognize you for any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Chairman Forbes. My colleague, the chairman of the subcommittee, Mr. Hunter, raised the question of the Arctic and the lack of an icebreaker. This is really a question that goes to Admiral Michael, but really to inform my colleagues on the naval side of this committee that we're not going to be able to put together a new icebreaker without, as Mr. Hunter said, an all-of-government strategy, one that we're going to have to take money from several different places in order to make this happen. The National Science Foundation is interested. The Navy is, and as Mr. Hunter pointed out very carefully, and certainly the Coast Guard. So we're going to have to figure out some way to do that. My question really goes a little beyond the very important point that Mr. Hunter raised, and it goes to the existing Polar Star. You have authority, Admiral Michael, to take the ship out of the water, check it out. What's the status of that process?
Well, there's a couple different Polar class icebreakers. The Polar Star is actually operational right now, and I had
the other one.
Yeah, I know they get confusing. I just had the pleasure of presenting a Master Cutterman certificate to the captain of the Polar Star at McMurdo Station down in Antarctica here just about 6 weeks ago. So the Polar Star is active. It's actually on its way to a regular maintenance dry dock. The Polar Sea, on the other hand, has been inactive for a number of years, had a major machinery casualty. There is money in the President's budget that continues the preservation work on there and begins the survey process of determining how much it would take in order to reactivate that ship. Understand, both these ships, the Polar class, were built in the mid-70s. Some of the technology, actually most of the technology on there has been, only exists in museums anymore. So this is kind of a challenge. Plus, Polar Sea in part was cannibalized so that we could get Polar Star underway. So it's in a different condition than Polar Star is. So we've got a process here to try to get our arms around that and start looking at what resources it would take in order to activate a ship like that, and that's where we stand with the Polar class reactivation.
Had a 4 letters when question.
Well, the preservation work is going on right now. We anticipate it's 15 to 18 months for us to get a good survey of the ship. It's going to have to be pulled out of the water. Again, we're going to have to do a serious survey on some very old machinery that you can't even really purchase anymore. So 15 to 18 months is our estimate so that we can get a sort of a good cost on what that would take and a good timeline for how long it would take to get that reactivated. And again, we'd be looking for about a 7 to 10 year reactivation time span is what we'd be shooting for.
How about a new icebreaker? When will you finalize the requirements for that?
So a new icebreaker, we're in the early stages of an acquisition of that icebreaker, and we've been doing some of the work on that. The problem is, sir, is that we have not built a heavy Polar class icebreaker in this country for over 40 years. The Polar class was the last that were done. And these are exceedingly complicated ships just because they exist in one of the most challenging environments on the Earth, and they're basically designed to collide with blocks of solid ice. So this requires special steels, construction techniques, and things like that. You're looking at many years in order to be able to scope out a project like this, determine who could actually in this country build a vessel of this class. The only operators of heavy Polar class icebreakers are us and the Russians. That's it. So there's very limited expertise in this area. It's going to be expensive, particularly if we have to build one.
We know that we buy our rocket engines from Russia. Maybe we can buy a ship from Russia, since you seem not to be too anxious to get about the task.
Well, it would obviously require legislative action in order to purchase a ship from Russia,
Well,
but
we understand that, but what my question really goes to is that you seem to be hemming and hawing and putting off someday into the future what our subcommittee thinks to be a very, very important activity. Mainly, we need an icebreaker. The Navy needs an icebreaker. This country needs an icebreaker. And the United States is now the chair of the Polar Committee. And all I'm hearing from you is we're going to get about it someday, 15 to 18 months to figure out whether the present ship can even float. And then who knows how long before the requirements are in place. It's not satisfactory.
I understand
satisfactory.
the dire situation, sir. I was there looking at that only pathway in and out of Antarctica that our ship is the only one that can break.
Well,
But here's where we are with acquisitions. As dire as we are on the polar icebreaker, and I as a sailor understand that, it keeps me up at night. The OPC is even more dire, and that's a much larger class of ships that even on the trajectory that we're talking about, 55 years old is the average age of the
we
ships that's going
understand
to be
that.
coming
Admiral, you
offline.
seem not to understand where I'm driving you. Your committee knows that it needs, that this country needs one more heavy icebreaker. We can't get by with just one. We need another one. The Navy and the Polar, all of those issues are before us. And what I am hearing from you is the inability for the Coast Guard to get us the specific information that we need to be able to make a decision about where to go with this issue. You're saying 18 months before we know whether we can rebuild the existing. And you seem not to, I don't know, 5 to 7 years or maybe longer before you are willing to give us the requirements for a new one. We want to make a decision. We cannot make that decision without the information that you need to develop for us sooner than later. I hope I'm clear here.
Yes, sir, and I'll provide you that information as soon as I can get it. This is a complex effort.
I think I had best stop because I'm about to climb up and down your back. That answer is not a satisfactory answer. As soon as you can get it. I'm looking at a time frame here where we've been prepared for more than a year and a half now to make a decision. We need your information in this time frame. I understand we're not going to get it this year, but if you come to us next year with the same attitude and the same delay and obfuscation, I can guarantee you that at least the ranking member of this committee is not going to be happy. I yield back my time.
We thank the gentleman, and before I go to Chairman Whitman, we do point out, I think our witnesses would love to build some more ships if we can get them some money to do it with. I know Admiral Donegan from his Navy account is looking at the Ohio class replacement that's going to be $60 billion and scratching his head as to where we're going to get that. I know I was just looking at our combatant commander requirements for BMD capability. They go up from this year at 44 ships to needing 77 in FY16, and yet we were getting ready to put aside 11 carriers, which had 5 of those BMD, and last year the Marine Corps had to fight to get its amphibious ship, which we wouldn't have got if it hadn't have been for Mr. Whitman's hard work on his subcommittee. So we want to continue to work with you guys, and I think Mr. Garamendi, Mr. Hunter, saying if you can help get the information. We realize you can't build it without dollars, so we do thank you for your help in that. Chairman Whitman, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your service to our nation. I do want to drill down a little bit into the Cooperative 21st Seapower strategy. Some questions come up with that. Admiral Michael, you talked about flexibility and agility. I think that's critical. The question then becomes, though, is how do you operationalize that? And I want to get everybody's perspective. How do you operationalize that between the Joint Chiefs and the COCOMs, especially with all the challenges they have? And as you know, the strategy now says that we're going to have all domain access, in addition to the other 4 tenets of Seapower. The question is how do you achieve that? How do you make sure, too, that within your C2, your command and control, how do you make sure that you integrate the Coast Guard into that? We see integration of the Coast Guard in certain mission sets, but not in every mission set. So, and with there being organizational differences or separation between the Coast Guard and the Navy Marine Corps, much of this sounds great, But the question is, you know, how do you operationalize that, and then adding to the complexity of saying now we're going to have all domain access, which means in the electromagnetic spectrum, in cyberspace, air, sea, land. I mean, that's a pretty complex environment. How are we going to achieve that? They're great assertions in the strategy. Give us your thoughts about operationalization.
I'll take it here from Coast Guard perspective. First of all, in the equipment that we buy, we try to make sure that's interoperable with the other sea services. So we carry Navy-type, Navy-owned equipment on the majority of the vessels that we operate, because we're required to operate as a specialized service of the Navy during time of war or when the President directs. So we ensure interoperability through our equipment purchases. We also operate...
Michael, let me stop you right there, because I think that's an interesting question I want to build on. As we're talking about shipbuilding and building lots of ships, we talk about building a Navy ships, DDGs, CGs. We talk about building medium endurance cutters, the new class of medium endurance cutters, the long range cutters. Seems like to me there's a great opportunity there to say, listen, why don't we look at some common hull forms? So when we do acquisition, we're not acquiring Coast Guard ships here and Navy ships there. We can say, listen, the national security cutter is real similar to the DDG. Why? Give me your perspective on how we can gain economies there, to where if we're going to have this cooperative strategy, does cooperation get down to the operational perspective of getting ships on the water?
Well, it absolutely does, and we had a very robust discussion with the Navy as we were determining the requirements for the national security cutter, including looking at the LCS and some of the other things that the Navy was doing. Now, the LCS didn't end up exactly what we needed for the Coast Guard's a little bit more ship than I think the Coast Guard needed for its mission set, but a very robust dialogue that went in there. On the other vessels, the FRCs are probably a little bit small for most of the what the Navy is doing, and the OPC is going to have its own requirements. But again, Coast Guard tries to borrow and leverage from the Navy as much as we possibly can. So when they get a weapon system or a communication system or any type of intelligence capability, we're all over with the Navy, and they're completely open with us, because it's to our mutual benefit to actually share those systems. So we've got a very robust dialogue, sir.
Sir, just a couple comments. Exactly what you're talking about, and you're well aware, because you were the leader of all that when we got the LPD-17 hull form for what we're working on next. But probably the same thing that the Admiral mentioned too at the Marine Corps. Our Naval Board works very, very hard to make sure that we are aligned with other services, and as you know, with the Commandant's planning guidance, not only with the Coast Guard, but with SOF, and making sure that we're integrating with everybody. So that's a big thing about the C2, and making sure that we're all using the same type of equipment and we're all the same frequencies. The other comment that I would just make very quickly is that the things that the Marine Corps is doing, we had kind of a little bit of a heads up. As you know, we rolled out EF-21 last year, about a year ago this time. And of course, the Commandant came out with his planning guidance about 2 months ago. So we've already kind of hit the ground running, and we're pretty well aligned already with the tenets that are in this strategy. So we feel pretty good. We've already had a couple of exercises. EW-15 just went up, and we came up with 232 gaps that we have to work on. But most of them luckily are not going to be equipment pieces, just a little bit how we're doing business.
So just the fact that we're here together gives you the indication. This is the second time this three services have come together to build this strategy. Should give you an indication that we get it in terms of what you said, that our objective is to make sure that the individual pieces add up to more when we put them together. I think that's really what you're trying to say. Yeah. There's a bunch of examples. The Naval Board was one. The Air Sea Battle Office is another. It's now, as you know, chaired. We changed the names, Joint Access and Maneuver in the Global Commons, but it's now chaired by the Marine 3-star General Gluck is chairing that right now to drive us to that interoperability that you're talking about, and take it beyond the strategy and put the strategy into action.
Sure. Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Ms. Gabbard from Hawaii is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My question was with regards to the portion of your strategy where you talk about the sea services deploying tactics, techniques, and procedures that target adversary vulnerabilities, and you talk about striking the right balance between kinetic and non-kinetic actions. And I'd like to see if you can detail more what those non-kinetic actions are.
Test, 1, 2, 1, 2.
I'll take it from
test,
Coast Guard
test.
perspective.
1,
Just here in the
2,
Western
1,
Hemisphere,
2.
the Coast Guard and the Navy have worked together actually for decades
Testing,
against
testing.
transnational organized
1, 2,
crime,
1,
most of
2.
which isn't taken care of as a
Testing,
kinetic
testing.
matter.
1,
It's actually
2.
taken care of as a
1,
law
2.
enforcement function.
Testing.
So Navy ships carry around Coast Guard law enforcement detachments so that we can use the sensor packages and the floating hull of the Navy to transport our law enforcement folks out there who've actually got the authority to take down the narco traffickers. And there's a whole range of other different activities that we work with them in sort of the non-kinetic or asymmetric arenas. Piracy is another example of that type of work, and some of the other things I listed under maritime security operations, which have as their end game, not a kinetic end game, a smoking hole in the water, but a law enforcement action or a sanctions enforcement or other types of things. And that ability to cooperate between Navy equipment and Coast Guard authority has been gold here in a lot of missions.
Thank you.
I think that a good way for us to explain the non-kinetic and kinetic, if we just talk about this new function that we talked about, which is all domain access, is a perfect example that we can describe the difference between kinetic and kinetic. It's striking the balance means we can't have systems, things that just shoot down other things, for example. That's cost prohibitive. It will run out of money long before we run out of the enemy having an ability to get at us. So in our work in achieving all domain access, it means working across the full spectrum using all domains to degrade, disrupt, deny, use the cyber and electromagnetic domain to make it harder for them to see us, the enemy to see us, for example, and therefore they can't employ their weapons, or if they did, they wouldn't go to the right place. So that we then can focus our kinetic resources on what got through after we did all that other work to make it much harder for them to be able to find us, see us, target us.
You mentioned in your focus on the Indo and Asia Pacific region how by 2020, approximately 60% of Navy ships and aircraft will be based in the region. What do you foresee could arise that would cause you to deter away from that plan between now and then?
Well, in other words, to not focus on or continue the rebalance that we talked about.
For you to not reach that that size of presence in the Asia-Pacific region?
Since that's our focus area, and most of the forces that we have there are already targeted to go there. In other words, we have the forces there, our FD&F forces are there. We've already begun establishing our LCSs in Singapore. The Marines are already moved some forces, as you know, into Australia. We have plans to move an additional submarine into Guam and additional ships into Japan, and they're on track and going to happen in the near term. It's going to be hard for us to come off of that because of the forces that are already there, and in the short term, what we expect to be there just in the next year or so, ma'am.
Great. Thank you. No, I asked the question because I obviously believe it's important that we recognize and continue to uphold kind of the commitment, the strategic commitment that we've made to the region, recognizing the opportunity and the strategic necessity to do that, given the environment that we sit in, both fiscally and politically and otherwise. It's good to hear the affirmation that this is something that is well on its way. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Now recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Cook, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to talk a little bit about maritime pre-positioning and where we stand on that. I was led to believe we still haven't replenished the supplies that were in there from our previous engagements in the Middle East. Can you give me an update on where we stand on that, Diego Garcia, and if you could?
Yes, sir. And I'll get you all the information here, but let me just very quickly go over that. We still only have 2 squadrons. We shut down the other squadrons, so we still have 2 squadrons with 12 ships. Each of those would have the mobile landing platform, of which you're familiar with, the exercises we've been doing off of Camp Pendleton, to be able to selectively offload equipment, load it onto transports, most likely LCACs, and put it towards the beach. So we still have the 12 with a mixture of old and new, TKEs being the new ones that are built in San Diego. But most of the other ships that we're building right now that will be up onto that thing will be that 12, along with the mobile landing platforms, what will help us move those things around. And the ships, is my understanding, I'll confirm this, but all the ships have been replenished and all the gear is on the normal cycle to be turned into Blount Island and turned around on time.
We have anything in Diego Garcia right now?
I'll have to get back to you on that. I don't, that's where the ships are, but I don't know if we actually have anything ashore.
Yeah, I'm just a little nervous about, you know, the Pacific is, the world is very big, and it's a long ways from North Korea to Australia and to Guam. And, you know, I understand the concentration, and we were in Japan together, of course. The other thing maybe I wanted to follow up on was what is the situation with Okinawa right now in terms of relocation? I know we had that issue in the past, and there's been a change in policy with the Japanese in terms of
1 2 1 2.
they certainly, I think, welcome military forces there. If you could just.
Yes, sir. No, as I mentioned, when I saw
1 2
you
1
in
2.
Dakota, I was
What do you
2
have
years
there?
at U.S. Forces Japan, and I saw the Congresswoman there too. I don't think there's a change in policy. I think essentially, and this is not my lane, we can get you their information, but it's not, I don't think there's a change in policy by the Abe government. They're going forward. There is that same issues down in Okinawa, but it's my understanding that the work is still going forward, and that's the agreement that we have between our two governments, that they will build the FRF and we will move there.
When is that supposed to be finished? Do you know offhand?
I'll have to get you that number.
Oh,
It's a
okay.
ways down. It's way down the road. But as we said in Japan, we would tell them, "You build it, we'll move." And so it's really kind of in their court right now. So we're working towards that.
Okay, okay,
I'll get you the exact dates, sir.
okay. Thank you very much. By the way, I did want to throw in a plug for the Coast Guard. I had the pleasure of visiting the Coast Guard Academy. Great institution, and encourage all my colleagues to go there. I wouldn't recommend going there in the winter. Go to Hawaii, see, visit the Congresswoman. I yield back.
Ms. Graham from Florida is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You could go to Hawaii or you could come to Florida. I recently had a chance to tour the Coast Guard facility in my district, and thank you for all you do. And I specifically want to thank the Coast Guard for all that you did during the tragedy that occurred last week, where we lost a helicopter training group of Marines and soldiers. So thank you very much for all that you're doing. And thank you, gentlemen, as well, the other two representatives here. My question's for Admiral Michelle. I understand the Coast Guard has been undergoing an acquisition program for a total of 8 national security cutters, 25 offshore patrol cutters, and 58 fast response cutters. In February of last year, the Coast Guard awarded 3 firm fixed price contracts for preliminary and contract design of the OPC. One of those contracts is in my district, Eastern Shipbuilding Group, which is located in Panama City, Florida. Now, I know that you can't comment further on any of these finalists, but I just want to be on the record of supporting Eastern Shipbuilding. It's a phenomenal small shipbuilding operation. I've toured it, and it's a great shipbuilding yard. With that said, Admiral Michelle, can you comment on the role of the OPC in the Naval Cooperative Strategy, and also on the carefully crafted ratio of 8 national security cutters, 25 offshore patrol cutters, and 58 fast response cutters? I much appreciate your response.
Yes, ma'am. Well, the OPC is really going to be the workhorse of the Coast Guard fleet, and it replaces our medium endurance cutters. 2 classes of those are 210-foot cutters, which will be 55 years old if everything stays on track, and then our 270-foot cutters, which will be about 35 years old when they come off the line with the OPC. And we're very much looking forward to the design work that comes through, and we're very encouraged that we're going to be able to get an affordable and capable platform for the OPC as we move forward. But
Ladies
this
and
really
gentlemen, I
does go
call
to
this
the
briefing of
cooperative
the
strategy
Emerging
because
Threats
the
and Capabilities
OPC is going to be the bulk
of
of
the
the
House
work
Armed
that's going to be
Services
done here in the
Committee
Western
to order.
Hemisphere,
I'm
which is
pleased to
Coast Guard
welcome
work,
everyone here today for this very important
by and
hearing
large that we've got to
on our
do
Special
maritime security
Operations
work, work
Forces
against
in the
transnational
United
criminal
States
organizations,
Special
fisheries
Operations
enforcement,
Command.
search and
As we
rescue, marine
review the
environmental
fiscal year
protection, responding to
2016
natural
budget
disasters,
request.
this whole basket of
With
things.
evolving and
This is going to be the
persistent threats being
workhorse for
posted
the
by
nation,
state and non-state
and it will
actors,
allow the
our
Navy and
Special
our other
Operations
forces who are
forces
pivoting
have
to
never
other
been
areas where
more
we have
central,
national
strategic,
security
and sought
concerns. They
after.
can rest assured that the
Illegal,
Coast Guard is there
asymmetric
because
enemy
we're forward
combatants, not
engaged
uniform,
with our
must be
offshore fleet, of
stopped
which the
overseas.
OPC
From
is
the
going to be the
unconventional
centerpiece of that
hybrid
fleet. It's
threats
going to be
of an
complemented by the
aggressive
higher-end
Russia, to the
NSC,
troubling,
but the
expansive,
OPC is going to
and
be the workforce,
clandestine
or the workhorse
networks of
for the
Iran,
nation
and of course,
in
an
that
evolving
maritime
Al-Qaeda,
security role. And we owe it to our
and their
sailors to give
affiliates,
them
now the Islamic State
decent
in
equipment
Iraq
and
and
55-year-old
Levant,
ships,
known in
which
the
can
region
almost take
as
Social
Daesh.
Security. We
We
shouldn't be
do
putting our
indeed
sailors out there. So
face an
again, we're
uncertain
very much
threat
appreciative of
environment.
the support, very much
Our
look
Special
forward to the
Operations
designs, and it's
forces have
critical
been
to the
engaged in
nation.
heavy
Thank you.
combat and
Thank you, and
direct action for
I
nearly
look forward
14
to it as well.
continuous
And
years.
thank you,
It is
Mr. Chairman. I
imperative
yield
that
back
we
my time.
properly resource,
Thank
train,
the
and
gentlelady,
equip
Mr. Graves
to
from Louisiana
now
is
deal
recognized for 5
equally
minutes.
as well with the hybrid and asymmetric
Thank you for being here
threats of
today.
tomorrow,
Appreciate the opportunity
and
to
do so with the looming
discuss with you a
shadow
number of issues
defense
important to
sequestration.
South Louisiana.
Simply put,
thank you for
our
your
national
update to the
defense
cooperative
and
strategy for
security of
21st
American
century
families
Seapower.
depends on
Certainly
this.
helpful to see the integration
The
of
House Armed Services
forces.
Committee has consistently
in that
supported our Special
update,
Operations Forces,
the-
providing additional
you're only as
authorities
strong
when
as your weakest
warranted,
link, right?
authorizing
And
additional
the Coast Guard
funds
does play
for
an important
unmet
role
critical requirements, and
in
most
the
recently resourcing
CS21,
important family
particularly
support
the role
and
of the
suicide
OPC, the
prevention
role
programs
of
to ensure
of
our
the
servicemen and women,
C-27Js.
our warriors and their families are taken care
When
of.
you look
and know
at the budget
firsthand
request, you're not
that
seeing
humans
additional
are
funds in
indeed
there. And so
more
I'm having
important
trouble
than hardware.
understanding how the Coast Guard is
Although
actually
our
going to fulfill
support has been
its role
consistent,
without
has
the
also been
resources
accompanied
there
by prudent oversight
to
and robust dialogue to
I
ensure
guess
that
actually
we
conduct the mission that's
do
laid
all
out in
things that is
CS21, and then
right
what type of
for the overall
repercussions does
defense
that
of our
have
great nation.
with your
The
sister
commitment
agencies?
and sacrifice of our Special
Secondly,
Operation Forces
I
is
think this is
evident to
perhaps
all
part of a
us.
larger problem.
We
When you look
examine this
across,
budget
as I
request
recall, the
to
ACI account
ensure
this
that
year
we in
does,
Congress are doing
as Chairman Hunter
everything
noted,
that we think is
experience
right and
a significant
necessary
reduction this
for
year.
those
Yet your mission is
units and
expanding,
their
as has been
families.
discussed here today.
So we look forward
And so
to
can you help me
discussing today
understand
the
or kind of
priorities
connect the
for the
dots
U.S.
there?
Special Operations Command.
Well,
and our
it's
Special
been pretty clear, and our
Operations
commandants
Forces for
testified that
fiscal
we've
year
had
2016,
acquisition challenges,
and perhaps
budget-driven
more
in
importantly,
large
discussing
part, and has forced us
candidly
to
the challenges
continue
that
to
stand
extend the
before us
length of
today.
our ships, whether
We
they're
have before
the
us
medium
a very
endurance cutters or
distinguished
the
panel
polar
of
class
witnesses.
icebreakers, where we've just
The
got
Honorable
kind of a
Michael
patchwork
Lincoln,
of things
the
to be able to
Assistant
do.
Secretary of Defense for
You know,
Special
we've got the
Operations
budget, we're going
and
to deal with
low-intensity
it. It's going to allow us to
conflict,
finish
and
out
General
the
Joseph
8
Votel,
NSCs, which we
the
need.
Commanding General
It's
of
going
the
to
United
allow us to
States
move
Special
forward with the
Operations
FRCs, but
Command.
we've got some
I'd like
serious
now to
challenges,
turn
and
to
I don't mean to
my
downplay
longtime
those.
friend and ranking member, Mr.
Thank you,
Jim
Admiral.
Langevin
General,
from Rhode
Admiral,
Island
could
for
you just
any
quickly
comments he'd
comment,
like to
again, focusing on the weakest link
Thank you, Mr.
comment
Chairman,
that
and I want
I
to
made
thank our
earlier.
witnesses for appearing before the
Do
subcommittee
you see the
today
Coast
to
Guard with its
discuss
aging
the Special
fleet
Operations
being
Command
able to
fiscal
fulfill
year
the mission? Are
2016
they dragging you
budget
down in
request.
regard, and certainly understand
Although our
acquisition
conventional
challenges in
forces
other
have seen
agencies as well,
increases in dwell
but
time over
are
the
they
last
dragging you down
few years as
and
combat
challenging your ability
operations in the Middle East
to
change
complete
in
your mission?
character. Special Operations Forces continue to
I'll
experience
start
a very
first.
high operational tempo.
Well, the Coast Guard's not
The
dragging
demand
us
for
down by any
SOF
means.
is
They're all
high
in
around
not
the
only
globe
the
due to a
strategy, but
variety
in
of
working
important
with us.
missions,
And where
including
they are
counterterrorism.
challenged
These
resource-wise,
operators
for
and
instance,
the conventional forces that enable
if we
them
talk
to
about
place
the Pacific and the Asia Pacific region,
lives
for
on the
example,
line each
if they
and
can't
every
get out
day
there and
far from home in order
participate
to
in a
keep
particular
us
exercise
safe.
that we
And
need
we should never lose sight
with a ship, ship,
of
they're
that
there
sacrifice,
with the rest of
for
their
which we are
forces,
all
whether
very
they send a
grateful.
leadette there or
This subcommittee
they've
is
already
keenly
built
aware
relationships
of the
with the
threats
countries we're
that
going
we
to work
face
on. We're
and
leveraging
the
the
importance of
relationships
soft
that they
missions to national
have already.
security.
Of course,
And
we'd
we
like
have
them to
acted
have more
commensurately,
resources and
both
ships
in
to
funding
be with
and
us
unique,
in those regards.
authorities, such as those
But
provided
given
under
that the challenges
Section
that they
1208.
have,
I
we're
look
working as
forward to
closely as
hearing
we
from the
can to
witnesses
get
about the
the
importance
most
of
out of
these
it.
and
So
other
I look
unique
at it more
authorities, as well
as
as
not
about
particularly
authorities
that you're
may
strong
need
as
to
your
be
weakest
extended
link,
in
that
the
we're
National
stronger
Defense
because we're doing
Authorization
this
Act for
together.
fiscal year 2016. If
Yes,
there are
sir.
any new authorities
And I
that may
would
be
just
required
echo
to
what
combat
Kit just
ISIL
said.
or
I
conduct
mean,
operations in
by no
areas
stretch of the
outside the Middle
imagination are they
East,
dragging us
like
down, but I
European
think
Command,
us working
I
together
hope
and
that the
advice being here
witnesses will
together
make that case
kind of
this
shows you that
afternoon.
we're all in on this strategy,
Congressional
and that
oversight of such
where
authorities,
some of
as
the
well as
things that
SOCOM
perhaps we can
funding,
do, the Marine
is
Corps can
obviously
do,
very
that the other
important.
two
Our SOF
gentlemen on each
personnel
assignment can't do.
operate in
We're going to
uncertain,
fill those
varying,
lanes,
and
and of course, there's
evolving
plenty of
environments that necessitate
gaps in the Marine Corps
continuous
that
assessment
both
of the
these
effectiveness and
services can help us
appropriateness
with too.
of authorities
So no,
granted.
by
Our
their
subcommittee
being
has
all in, I
worked in
think
the
we all
past
are.
to increase oversight oversight.
Thank you.
to
And
improve
I want to
reporting, and I
echo
wanna express my
comments of some
appreciation
of the more
for
senior members in regard to
transparency
the
of SOCOM.
icebreakers. It
But
seems like
internal
that is
oversight
once
of
again a
SOF
capability that
operations
is
and,
potentially going to challenge all the
SOCOM,
services
is
if
just
it's not
as
aggressively
important.
addressed.
Secretary Lumpkin,
One other
we
comment,
recently had the
Admiral
opportunity to discuss
Michael,
the Oversight Council
I keep
that
looking at
you're
your name
establishing.
in South
And I'd
Lansing, that would be
appreciate if you
Michelle.
could provide the subcommittee with an
Oh,
understanding
is it?
of the
Okay, well, there we go. I
council,
was listening to
including
other folks.
members,
Sorry.
meetings,
I'll
and
stop following
issues
the elders
of
here.
focus. General Votel,
Very quickly, in the Coast Guard's Western
I look
Hemisphere
forward to hearing from you as
strategy,
well on the
you list trends,
preservation of the
national
force
criminal
and
organizations
families initiative,
as
among
a mission
other
of the
things
Coast
under
Guard
your
and something that you plan to
responsibility,
address.
and I appreciate
Could you
the
talk
meeting that you and
about,
I
just
had,
briefly, how that
yesterday.
dovetails or
As I
intersects
mentioned earlier,
with
Special
CS21?
Operations Forces continue
And
to face
how
high
CS21
operational
perhaps
tempo.
addresses that challenge?
The mental
Sure,
health
the Western
of
Hemisphere
operators
strategy
and their
was
families
designed by the
remains
Commandant
a
specifically to
priority
work
both
with
for you, I know,
CS21
and
so
for
that we
Secretary
could
Lumpkin
focus
and
our
his
core
responders.
competencies here in the
Last year,
Western
our
Hemisphere and
subcommittee,
allow our
conjunction with the
Navy
Personnel
Marine Corps folks to
Subcommittee,
focus
increased funding
in
for
other
mental health
areas.
programs
So
for SOF
the strategy
due to
itself,
increases
which
in
talks
suicides.
about combating networks,
Additionally, I
primarily
sponsored
transnational criminal
provision
organization
in
networks,
the
which
FY15 NDAA
for a lot
to
of these
assess the
countries are
effectiveness
national
of
security
SOCOM's
threats. I mean, ask a
alternative
country like
approach
Honduras,
to
the
mental and
extreme murder
behavioral
rates and
health
homicide
new
rates and things that
existing
they have in
service
there.
programs.
And the Coast Guard's
General, I look
presence
forward to
there
working with you
really
this
is
year to
critical to these
continue to
nations
support our
because it
SOF members,
polices off
and their
cocaine
families.
before it actually
Our
gets into
goal,
Central America and creates
on this front,
death and
taking care of
devastation.
our
Just the
force and their
effectiveness of the
families
Coast Guard
are
last year
one
seized
and the same.
91 metric tons of cocaine. That's about
closing,
1.5
I wanna express again
times
my gratitude
all the
to
cocaine seized
General
within the
Votel,
United States last
your
year by
service to
every
our
law
nation,
enforcement agency
and Secretary
and
Lumpkin,
all
as
that
well for
seized
you
at
for all you
every
do for our
air,
nation,
land, and seaboard of the
and
United
the
States
enduring commitment
combined.
that you have
So that's
to
how
our
effective
men
that
and
is, and
women in
Coast Guard
uniform.
interdiction
Mr. Chairman, I
efforts
wanna
are
thank
much
you for
closer to
meeting
the
with
head
us
of the
here
snake
today,
that
and I
starts
look forward
this
to discussion.
than, a buy
Mr.
bust on
Langevin,
the
thank you
streets
very
of one of
much,
our
and,
hometowns. So it's
we'll
a
proceed
critical
with,
national security
Secretary
function.
Lumpkin.
It's complementary
look
to the
forward to
Navy
your
and the rest of our
opening
sea
statements
services and was
of each
designed
of you, and
exactly to
then
work like that,
following
sir.
that,
Thank you,
we'll,
Admiral. General
have
Admiral,
a
thank you very much,
5-minute,
Mr. Chairman. You're back.
question,
Mr. Cummings
period
is recognized for
each
5
member.
minutes.
Thank you very much,
as
Mr.
the
Chairman.
alternate,
Admiral
we're very
Michelle,
fortunate that
let
Kevin
me ask
Gates
you,
will be
just picking up
maintaining the
on
time. He's above
what you were
reproach.
just talking
So we'll
about.
begin with,
Before he
the
retired,
Secretary.
Admiral
Thank you.
Papp indicated that there had
Thank you,
been
Chairman
an
Wilson, Ranking Member Langevin, and
30%
distinguished members of the committee.
drop
Thank you for
in
the
drug
opportunity to
interdictions
testify
as a
before you
result of the
today.
cuts
I'm
required by
glad to speak about
sequestration
the
several
health
years
and
ago.
welfare of our nation's special
What
operations
trends have
community
there been
and
in
our capability to
drug
meet our nation's
interdictions
most
over the
pressing national
past
security
year? And
concerns
if we return
today and into the
to
future.
sequestration, what
Currently, our
impact
Special
would
Operations
that have
Force,
on
also
drug
known as
interdictions?
SOF, work within
I mean, you
an
gave some
environment with
very,
fiscal uncertainty,
some very high
challenge
numbers you
us to
just
think
mentioned,
creatively
and I'm just
bridge
wondering.
gaps between resources and
Yes,
U.S.
sir. Well, I can tell you, based on long years of
the
experience, I used to be
changing
the
nature of the
director of
threats
Joint
we face
Interagency
today
Task Force South, which was right in the middle of
demands
this fight,
SOF's
sir.
attention and
Here's the
engagement through
bottom
agile
line for major
authorities
cutters of the
that
Coast Guard,
enable
and
us
this
to
has been over
remain
many
ahead of our
years.
adversaries.
One cutter year's worth of
Addressing how
effort
SOF
sees
will
about 20
effectively
metric
operate
tons of
within this
cocaine.
environment,
That's
I'd like
about
to
$1
invite
billion
your
in
attention to
traffickers'
the following
profits.
3 topics.
Over many years, that was
Foremost,
about the
SOF
national
is
average for
navigating
all the
a
cocaine
challenging
seized
fiscal
within our
environment
borders
through
every year
enhanced
by
oversight.
one ship of the
As the
Coast Guard.
service-like
That's how
Secretary
effective
of
maritime
USSOCOM,
interdiction
I
is,
provide
but you
oversight
got to get
and
the ships to
supervision
do
of
it. Right
SOF
now, about
resources,
the
develop
figures are
SOF
here and there,
policies
but
for
about
counterterrorism,
3/4 of those high
counter-narcotics,
confidence intelligence
and
cases that we
preserve
know
and
are moving
protect
out
our
on there
Special
in the
Operations
water.
Force.
We can't interdict
This
because
role
there's no
becomes
ships
ever
in
more
order to be
challenging
able to
in a
do it.
constrained
So you know
budgetary environment
they're out
in
there.
which we must use
Yes, sir.
limited
You just
resources
can't get to 'em.
efficiently
Yes,
and
sir. I, as
effectively
JADF
so that
director, used to watch
SOF
the
is
vessels
globally
go by,
postured
but
to
there were
support
not
the
enough ships
combatant
out there to
demands.
be able to action it. And then once it gets
With
into Central America, it's
sequestration
broken
level
into
cuts set
such
for
small
fiscal year
parcels, it becomes hard to
2016 and
police
lease
beyond.
up, plus it
Continue
creates
to
corruption,
strengthen our
death,
budget
destruction,
management
all its
in
way,
order to maximize
wherever it moves on
taxpayers'
its way up
return
to
on
our
investment in
citizens.
stock.
So it's
In
tragic
addition,
when
we
it
look
gets
for
past
innovative
us. But
ways
again,
to use
that's forward,
existing
engaged,
resources.
ready, complementary,
Moving to my
non-redundant,
second
Seapower
point,
capability of
SOF
the
is most
nation that
effective
works
to handle the changing
directly with
nature
our
of
partners.
threats
So
that we face
it's
when
tragic
agile
that we have to
authorities
see that
are
go by,
available.
but if we don't
From
build ships,
ISIL
that's what
to
ends up
pro-Russian
happening.
rebel forces in
What
Ukraine,
impact have
the
asset
United
failures
States and our
had on
international partners
the Coast
face a
Guard's
diverse set of
ability
unconventional
to
threats
perform its mission?
worldwide.
Well,
Centered
lots
within the
of
physical
different
terrain,
things, sir.
the
We're
human
lucky
domain,
that we
information
had a
environment, and
major
financial
casualty on
cyberspace.
Polar Star, but thank God it was kind
Additionally,
of out of the
our
ice by the
response
time
efforts
that it
often
actually
require
happened. But
security force
that's a daily
assistance
occurrence for the
missions
Coast Guard.
in
And our medium
non-permissive
endurance cutter
and
fleet, our
politically sensitive
210
areas
fleet,
where the host
210-foot
station
fleet,
demands
over
discrete
20%
US
of the
footprint.
operational hours were consumed
Due
by
to its unique,
breakdowns.
irregular,
The
and
ships are just
unconventional
that old
capabilities,
that I
SOF
don't say we're
routinely
in a
becomes
death
the force of
spiral
choice.
yet, but We
To this
spend
point,
increasing
Agile
amounts of
authorities
lost
maximize
operational
soft
time
capabilities,
and
helping support
continuous
soft
investment in
operations.
these old class of ships that could be
Support
spent
for
on
foreign partners is
recapitalization
fundamental
efforts.
to
Again, I
operational
wouldn't want to
success
say
in
we're in a
overseas
death spiral, but
contingency
we're
operations.
definitely playing with fire
And
with
U.S.
these old
financial
ships.
and
Just a
logistics
sailor's
support
been
is
around for a long
necessary to
time.
ensure
These
their
ships are
continued
really
participation.
old and they need to be
With the
replaced, and it has an
codification of
impact on a
sections
daily basis, and that's what
2282,
keeps me awake, and I
1004,
manage
and
all this
1022
old infrastructure
in
with
Title
all
10 of
these
the U.S.
pressing
Code,
missions that are on
the
top of
Global
us. That's why they
Security
pay me the
Contingency
money, but
Fund,
very
and the new
uncomfortable
Counterterrorism
position, sir.
Partnership Fund.
Does
We
that,
can assist our partners to address
so
emerging threats and opportunities by building
what do you
their
have to give up
security
then? So,
capacity
so you're spending
before
this
those
time
threats exceed their ability
repairing
to
old ships.
effectively respond.
You got
However,
them
building
falling
partner
apart.
capacity takes time.
And what
Our
gives?
building partnership capacity
I
authorities
mean, is there?
do
I mean,
not
you have a priority
accommodate
of what
sustainment
gives, or
costs.
just?
So we work
so
closely with
haphazard?
the State
Sir,
Department to ensure
the
partner
risks
nations
to the
eventually
nation and the
fund
key areas of
and
the Coast Guard
sustain
that are
these
fulfilled
programs
by
on
these
their own.
platforms increases every day, whether it's risk
Agile,
of access to
unallocated
Antarctica,
funding
whether
enables
it's
implementers
risk
to
of
rapidly
access to
respond
the
to
Arctic,
urgent
whether
needs
it's
of
fisheries
partner
enforcement,
nations
whether it's
more
maritime law
expeditiously
enforcement,
and for a
whether
greater
it's our
length of
ability
time
to
than is
respond to a
possible
hurricane
with
or natural
traditional
disaster or an
mechanisms.
oil spill
And
or a
my
mass
final
migration
point,
incident,
protection and
the risk in
preservation
that
of SOF
fleet goes
is
up
of
every
utmost
single day.
importance.
Now, we bought some
Our
of it
people are
down
the
through the
foundation
National
of
Security
special
Cutter and the
operations,
Fast Response
and we
Cutter, which are
strive to
way
ensure
better
our force
assets than the
and
ones
their
that they
families
replaced,
have a
but they're
support
fewer
system
in number.
necessary to
Our
ensure
major
their
cutter fleet is going to go,
long-term
even under the current
prosperity and
plan,
health.
from 44 ships
Assessing our
down to
force,
33
structure,
ships.
operational
Now, they're a
requirements
little
and
bit more capable
capabilities at
ships,
various
but
resourcing
still,
levels.
the numbers
We have
don't
reshaped
lie. So
SOF's
this is
operational
all about
units,
risk
elements, and
management, and that's
platforms
what
that we
I
can
spend the
meet future
majority of my days,
operational
sir,
requirements.
is managing risk.
In addition, we
Where to
seek to
place
ensure the
assets,
physical
which ones
and
to
mental
bring in the
resilience
yard,
of the
how
individuals
long
who
can we
make up
run
our
the
force.
ships before they break or catch on
Continual
fire.
combat deployments
That's
combined
what
with
I do on a
demanding
daily
training
basis, sir, and
regimen
that's what
needed to
we're
keep the force sharp
incurring as
have
additional
caused
risk.
stress on the
Last
force
question. Can
and
you
with their
discuss the state of
As ASD SOLA,
the
I will
Marine
continue to
Safety
support
Program?
enhanced
That's something
resiliency
I've
training
always been very
currently being
interested in.
conducted through U.S.
What's
SOCOM
happening with
service
it?
component
Well, that's a
programs.
whole another side of the
In
Coast Guard
closing,
that's critical
throughout
to
the entire department,
the
we
national
are committed
security
to
and
doing
the
everything we
economy
can
of the
to
United
ensure that our
States. That's
nation's
all
SOF have
ensuring
the
that our
best training,
waterways operate
equipment,
correctly and that
overall
we've got
support
licensed
that we can
mariners and
possibly
safe
provide.
equipment and all that.
We will continue to work
And
closely with
that is
Congress
definitely
and
one of the
senior
priorities
policymakers
of the
across
Commandant of the Coast
government
Guard
to
under
ensure
our
that we have
Energy
the right
Action Plan.
policies
He's
and
asked
oversight
us,
in
well, he's
place
tasked me with putting together an
so that
entire
SOF
plan to
effectively operates within the
revitalize our
current and
marine
future
safety program,
environments.
which is
I
another
thank Congress
investment
for
we're
its
going to have to
continuing
make to
support of our
ensure that we
special
can respond
operation
to new
initiatives,
developments in offshore
resourcing
oil
and personnel,
infrastructure
and I look
or
forward to your
Bakken crude
questions.
oil
Thank you
moving
very
down
much.
the nation's
Secretary Lockett, thank you very
waterways
much.
or a whole
General
range
Votel.
of different activities. The marine
Good
industry
afternoon,
is
Chairman Wilson,
incredibly
Ranking Member
vibrant in this
Langevin,
country
and other
and
distinguished members
uses
of the
technology more and
subcommittee. Thank you
more
for the
as
opportunity
time
to
goes on.
appear before
But
you to
to
discuss
keep
the
up with
current
that,
posture
instead
of
of
the
being a
United States
regulatory
Special
hurdle
Operations
to that
Command, or
industry, really
SOCOM, as we
requires
call it.
significant investment in
I'm
increased
especially pleased to be
expertise
here
and
with my
capacity in our
OSD
people.
teammate, Assistant
There for a
Secretary
while
Michael
they're building
Lumpkin.
out one tank
SOCOM
barge a
was
week
created
down
by
on
the
the
Congress to
on the
ensure that
Gulf
we
Coast,
always
and
had
each of
ready
those
and
requires
capable
Coast Guard
SOF
inspections.
forces
Each one of
to meet
those
the nation's
requires a
challenges.
waterway
Our
to be
ability
operate
to
safely on, and
address
that's a
these
whole nother
challenges
mission
is
set
due
of
in
the
large
Coast
part
Guard,
to
and
the
the Coast
strong
Guard's
support we
stretched
get
pretty
from the
thin.
Congress,
And
from the House
but
Armed
you've got my
Services
commitment to
Committee, and
work on that
especially from
area,
this
sir. It's on my
distinguished subcommittee. Thank you very
task
much.
list.
I'd like to
that's,
start out
getting
by
pretty long
commenting
these
on the
days.
amazing
very
actions
much,
made
Mr.
every day
Chairman.
by our special
Kern
operations
is
men and
recognized for
women,
5 minutes.
operators, acquirers,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you for being here
analysts, and
today.
many
And
others. Active
I
and
know that
reserve,
each one of you are
military and
dealing with
civilian, the
lots
total
of
SOF
difficulties
force.
because of budget
Alongside our
cutbacks.
conventional
And
force partners,
I appreciate
the
what you do. You're
69,000
managing a very
quiet
difficult
professionals of
situation,
SOCOM are
with a
committed
very
to
difficult budget
values-based
situation.
excellence
So our
and
job to
service
try to
our
make that a little
nation.
better for you.
They relentlessly pursue
By the
mission
way, Admiral
success.
Michelle, I've got
Today,
2
roughly
Coast Guard bases
7,500
in
of
my
them are
district
deployed
in
to over 90
Mobile,
countries
and I've
worldwide,
been out
supporting
in
geographic
the
combatant
air
command
assets and in
requirements
the marine
named
assets, and I've
operations.
seen for myself
We are a force that has been
some
heavily
of the
deployed over the last
challenges you've got
14
in the
years,
Coast Guard,
and
and
our
my
military
hat's off to you
members,
for what you've been able to do
civilians,
so
and their
far.
families have paid a significant
Admiral
price
Dunnigan, I have
physically
a question
and
for
emotionally
you.
serving our country.
The
We are very
2015
appreciative of
strategy
the support we have
identifies the
received from
importance
Congress to
of
address
U.S.
the
naval
visible and
cooperation with
invisible
international
challenges,
partners.
and we never forget
And I
that for
firmly believe
SOCOM,
the interoperability
people
with
are
our
our most
allies is
important
critical to
resource.
creating an agile force. Can you elaborate on
Today,
the
the
impact
United States
of
is
having
faced with many
forward
challenges.
deployed
The
assets
spread of technology
like the
and the
littoral
diffusion of
combat
power
ship
are
in
not
regions
only
like
being
the
used by
South China
responsible
Sea,
leaders
and what
to
the
better
presence of
societies,
ships
but
like the
unfortunately by
LCS
wicked
means
actors
to our
to
partners
orchestrate
in
terror
that
and
region.
violence regionally and globally. Non-state actors
Yes, sir,
like
I certainly
Al-Qaeda and
can.
ISIL and other violent extremist organizations,
As
menacing
you
state actors
rightly
like
said,
North Korea,
this strategy
and
really
growingly
talks
coercive
as
actors
one of
like
the
Russia
underlying
are just a few
underpinning things, along
examples
with
of
being
the
forward,
entities affecting
being
the strategic environment in which we
engaged,
operate.
and the engaged
We are
piece is
equally
with our
affected
partners
by
to
the
build that
growing
alliance,
use
to
of
build
cyber
those
capabilities and
trusts,
social media,
to build that
which
trust.
make it easy for our
To have
adversaries
ships
to
like
communicate,
LCS, as you know,
coordinate,
we're putting
execute,
4
and
into
inspire their
Singapore, and we're going
actions.
to
The
get
fiscal
some more bang
environment
for
is
the
of
buck in
concern
terms
as
of
well.
presence by
While
rotating
SOCOM has
crews
been
on
well
those ships.
supported
That's
in
part of the
recent
innovation
years,
piece that
I
we're
remain
talking about.
profoundly
But
concerned
it
by
allows
the
us to
impact
be
of another
responsive
round of
to
sequestration and how it not
things
only
that happen
impacts
that
SOCOM,
build up our
but more
credibility in the
importantly,
region.
how
That
it will affect
when the
the
Allies
force
turn and
services
look, they see
upon whom we
and
are
know and are
absolutely
assured that we're going to
dependent for
be
mission
there.
support.
The LCS, for instance,
To
was one of
address
the
the
first
challenging
ships,
security
Fort
environment,
Worth, that we had over there
SOF
that
provides a
responded when
portfolio of options to
when
our
we had the
national
recent
leaders and to
airliner
the
go down.
geographic
That's an
combatant
example.
commanders.
When
Through
you
small
have
footprint operations and
humanitarian
by relying on
assistance
a
or
network
disaster
of
response,
purposeful partnerships,
exactly that
SOF
kind of
provides a
ship can
comparative
provide.
advantage
But
through
also when we
persistent
move into the
engagement,
higher end piece,
partner
as you know,
enablement, network
that
focus,
ship
and
fills
discrete
gaps
rapid
in
response
mine
to crisis
warfare,
situations.
anti-submarine warfare,
While we
and
support
surface
military
warfare.
operations across
So
the
it was also
spectrum,
meant to
SOF
contribute and will
capabilities
contribute in
are
the event
uniquely suited to operate and
we have
succeed in the
to,
gray
together with
zone
our partners,
between
get
normal
involved in any
international
kind of conflict.
competition and
So
open
absolutely,
conflict. And it is in this
that
area
ship
where we see our very
will
best
bring
opportunities
us
to help
back a
shape the
return on
future
investment.
environment.
It's
To
also
enable
in other
our
places,
efforts,
though. As you
I
know,
have
we're going to
established
base
5
them in San
priorities for the
Diego and
command.
Jacksonville, Florida.
First,
So
we must ensure
the
SOF
one
readiness
certainly
by
based
developing
in
the right
Florida will
people,
have better
skills,
access
and
to support
capabilities to meet
the
future,
Coast Guard and what we were just
current,
talking
and
about
future
and the
requirements.
Southcom commander
To
and the
this
missions
end,
he has
we
on
want to ensure
counter-drugs.
want
It's
to
also
ensure
going
effectiveness
into
now
into
and into the
Bahrain
future with the very best SOF
replace the
operators
mine
and
ships
support
we have
personnel,
there. But as you
enabled
know,
by the
building the
best technology
partnerships
and capabilities
amongst the
we can
navies in the
field.
Gulf
Along the
requires
way,
that you
we
have
want to make the
a
very
ship that's
best use of
compatible
the
with them,
unique
where they can see you
MFP-11
operating side by
authorities that
side with
Congress
their
has
ships,
granted us.
and we can definitely
Second,
do that.
we
An
must help
example
our
is we
nation
just
win
did
by
a mine
addressing
countermeasure
today's
exercise in the
security
Gulf.
challenges.
We
We
had
strive to
on
provide
the order of
coherent and
44
well-integrated
nations and
SOF
38
forces for the geographic
38
combatant
different
commanders,
ships
focused
participating
on
in that
optimizing
event.
our SOF
Nowhere
activities.
else can you bring
Nearly
together that many
everywhere,
nations
you will
to build
find SOF
partnerships
forces
and
working
build that
alongside
trust
and
that we're
often
talking
in
about.
support of their
Are you
conventional
already
force
working on
partners helping
plans for
accomplish
how
our
you will
security objectives.
utilize the LCS
Third,
when it's
we must
redesigned to
build
be a
purposeful
frigate?
relationships to improve global
Yes, sir.
understanding and
We're in
awareness
the
to
forefront
create
of that,
options for
as
our
you know,
leaders.
but it's going to
We
bring
don't own
additional
the network,
capability, which means
but we are an
in those
important
mission
part of
sets
it,
that I
and
just
working
talked
with our
about, you're
partners,
talking
we will
about
always produce the best options for our
reliability
nation.
and survivability
Fourth,
because of the
we
weapon
have to
systems
prepare
that
for
we're
the
putting on.
future security environment
Thank you.
to
I
ensure
think the
that
LCS
SOF
has
is ready
proven
to
to be
win
a
in an
very wise
increasingly
investment
complex
by
world.
the Navy and by the country,
Ultimately,
and I
our
appreciate your
goal is to
plans and
match
usage of it.
exquisite
And I yield
people
back.
with cutting-edge capability I'd like to and the finish very up best where we ideas to started help
by
our nation
saying what a good
succeed
job that
against
the
the looming
three of you
challenges
did
we will
with all
face
of
in
the
the future.
individuals working with you.
Finally,
We appreciate
we must
your
preserve our
hard work
force
on
and
this.
families to ensure
But
their
it's a piece
long-term
of paper.
well-being.
So, Admiral
It is
Duncan,
this
how do we
area we are
go
especially
from
focused
strategic
on,
theory
where we are
to
especially
operational
focused on a
effectiveness?
holistic approach to address the invisible challenges of stress
So
and
that's
suicide
a great
that are
question,
affecting our
and the
service
good
members,
news is
civilians, and their
while we
family
were
members.
building the strategy,
In
we
closing,
took on
I
the
remain
piece
honored
of how
and
do I
humbled by the opportunity
operationalize
to
it?
command
How do
the
we
best special
implement it?
operations
First
forces
of all,
in
we
the
have to
world.
implement it
I'm
together.
incredibly
And
proud
so,
of each and every one of our
because
team
it's a
members and
strategy
their
written by
families.
us together,
I look forward
all
to
the services
your
are
questions
going to
and our dialogue
participate
today.
are already participating in the
Thank you
process
very
of
much, General
implementation.
Votel, and thank both
Some
of
of
you
those
for being here
processes
this
are well
afternoon.
underway
We are
with the
going to
Naval
begin
Board,
now the
with
5-minute
our
round
Coast Guard and
of
Navy
each,
warfighting talks,
member
with
of the
Navy
subcommittee,
and Marine Corps warfighting
and
talks.
each of us
But
will
we
be
also are
strictly
planning
held
on a
to 5
series
minutes,
of,
and,
as you know, we have a
and Mr.
classified
Gates will
annexes
maintain
coming with this
the clock.
with
My first
after this
question
strategy.
for both
That's
of you
part of the operationalizing when we bring
deals
together
with the impacts of defense
the
sequestration
staffs here in the
on national
Pentagon,
security in our
with
military.
our Naval War
I know
College,
this
which
has
runs
impacted even
wargaming
the
for us,
special operations
with
forces.
forward
And
deployed
for
fleet
both of you, can
commanders
you
and
provide
combatant commanders,
specifics
and
of
begin
how defense
and
sequestration
execute
has impacted
war games,
Special Operation Forces.
and modeling and
Without
simulation,
a
where we can
solution to defense
iteratively look at the
sequestration, what
problems that we're
damage will be
facing
done?
in each
And I'm
region.
particularly
Each region has a
concerned about
certain threat,
readiness.
and each
And
region
we'll begin
has
with the
a
Secretary.
certain plan to
Thank
deal
you,
with
Mr.
that
Chairman, for
threat.
that question.
And what we're working forward to operationalize this strategy
As General
now
Votel
looking at
mentioned in his opening statement,
the
the
current
reliance
way we
of
would get at
support
that
from the
threat,
services is
running
where
it
we see
through a
the
series of
largest
war games,
impact,
and
from
determining if
where I
we have
sit,
any gaps
is
we need to
when we
fill.
look at
And
what
if we
the
fill those
impacts of
gaps,
sequestration would
how
have
would
on
we fill those
USSOCOM.
gaps? I'm sorry.
A potential of
It's not all
losing,
about buying something new.
ISR
It may be an
support,
adjustment to the concept.
impacts on
So we have
modernization.
concept
of-
development work going on. It may be something innovative, like we're doing with high-energy lasers or rail guns, or it may be something in cyber. It may be another way to get at the problem that isn't just buying something, as I talked about before, and where you get into this thing-on-thing problem. So we're doing that. As you know, the Navy's also developed a strategist subspecialty code. That's where we've identified the really smart folks, placed them in all the right places so we can link the strategy to what it is we go buy. Because in the end, this force will be what we bought and also how we employ it. So the first part gets at how we employ. The second piece we have to link this strategy to what we buy. So those are some of the things. There's more into the continuum that we call it, the strategic continuum that does that linkage.
We heard Mr. Garamendi, Mr. Hunter correctly be concerned about building icebreakers and more ships. If Mr. Whitman was here, he'd be concerned about his aircraft carriers. Mr. Courtney would certainly be concerned about his Virginia-class submarine. As I look at the strategy, it's going to call for an additional 23 forward-deployed ships and projects about a 60% increase of Navy ships and aircraft in the Indo-Pacific region by 2020. Where do they come from? Do we build them? Do we bring them from other parts of the globe? And if we build them, do we have the industrial capacity to accommodate this strategy for either?
Well, sir, it's a combination of a little bit of each of what you said. We are building more. As you know, the Secretary was in here and talked to you about his plan for building some more. But it's also about the innovative employment of the assets that we do have. An example is if the ships that we can put forward bring us more return on investment. In terms of the commodity that we give, and that commodity is forward presence. So the ships we put into Rota, Spain, we're putting 4 ships into Rota, Spain. There are high-end DDGs with the ballistic missile defense capability. If we were to resource that same commitment of presence from the United States, we need 10 of those ships. So part of the increase in the presence that we're getting is the fact that how we're employing those ships. The LCSs that we're putting into Singapore, we're putting 4 of those there. They're not going to be based with their families, but we're going to rotate crews. Our modeling and simulation tells us that we'll basically get a 2-fold increase in presence because of that concept. So we'll get 2 ships it would take back here to keep that one forward, if that would make sense. If we were doing rotational, we'd need twice as many LCSs to do that same kind of presence. So it's a combination of the innovative way we're employing it. It is a combination of growing the force to some extent with those that are already in the shipbuilding plan.
Please, General.
Sir, thanks. I would just make one comment that we're already looking, the Commandant has made it very clear that we are looking at all avenues to get Marines out on ships. Now, most of the alternate platforms that we talked about earlier coming from the MPS, those are for the low end of the ROMO, but they could be out there doing theater security cooperation or humanitarian assistance and those types of things, and that helps take some of the pressure off the amphibs. So we still have to, they're not a replacement for the amphibs, but they are complementary, and that they could probably reduce some of the workload on those amphibs. And so we're looking very closely at that, and we're working obviously very closely with the Navy on that, and we see some real opportunity there to help reduce some of that thing. The last thing I would leave you with, and I didn't get a chance to mention before, but coming from 2 years in Japan and watching, I can't speak to the South China Sea, but I certainly can speak to the East China Sea, and the Japanese Coast Guard taking the brunt of that. They have learned a lot watching how our United States Coast Guard and United States Navy work together very closely, hand in glove. And the 2 years I was there, I saw them a lot more interoperability among their own ships by just watching and learning from the gentlemen on either side of me in their service. That's all.
Let's suppose my last question, that Mr. Garamendi has a final question, but I know the President's, or the Navy's President's budget request for FY 2016 is 300 ships. We're currently at 287. And let's just say we have one member that might slide in here, be just a little skeptical that we don't get there. If we do not get there and we have a reduction in the number of ships, is this strategy still possible with fewer ships?
So we wrote, the 3 services wrote this strategy based on what our assessment of that environment that I described earlier says that the nation needs from the sea services. So the first thing that I'll say is the targets that we want to get to and how we're going to employ the force and the way we're going to do it and the capabilities we need, and to some extent the numbers are what we believe the nation needs. Now, that said, if we get less than that, we're still going to move out on that trajectory with those priorities, and then we're going to be coming back and talking to you about the risks that then we're going to be taking and where that would be. We'll still work on innovation and efficiency to reduce that risk as much as we can, but we'll be very open and transparent with where we see the risk coming if we're not given the resources to the level that we describe in some parts of the strategy.
Mr. Garamendi has a final question, and after his question, as I told each of you before, we're going to give you whatever time you need as a summation, or if there's anything you need to clarify or add that we haven't put on the record. Mr. Garamendi?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for putting together this hearing. Gentlemen, thank you for your participation and your service. Admiral Donegan, the revised cooperative strategy for Seapower implies the ready deployment of sea service assets, and it does in fact mention the involvement of the Military Sea Lift Command and the essential contributions that the MSC vessels and capabilities are available. And it does raise the question of whether our domestic sea lift capacity is sufficient to meet the needs of this new strategy. Is it sufficient?
We believe right now it's sufficient. The question, though, I think that we have to address is looking forward as we continue our iterative wargaming and simulations and modeling that we're doing. As we move to the future and that force is potentially less available or comes under greater stress, we have to see if the combination of all the things that give us sea lift, which is the Combat Logistics Force combined with Military Sea Lift Command and the other sea lift that we bring to support our sea base, are enough to do it. I think that it's going to be a function of the scenario and the location of where it occurs. And we also have, as you know, because each of those vessels require escorts, we have to work that piece too to make sure that we have the right size and shape. Right now, for what we have in the current force, yes. And I think as it comes under stress, because less of those become available, we're going to have to reevaluate that as we go along.
Okay, we have some significant concerns about the future of the Military Sea Lift Command, the aging of the ships and the like. I'd like to get into more detail with you on that. Just another set of questions quickly. The Navy is using UAVs off its ships. And Admiral Donegan, my understanding is that you're advancing this program very rapidly and that you're have some satisfaction with the potential that it brings to expanding the ability of the ship to see what's going on and to do its task. Is that the case?
Sir, specifically, the strategy talks about continuing to develop unmanned systems that improve our abilities to do what we need to do. And the unmanned brings endurance, for sure, and it brings capabilities that man does not bring. And I'm not just talking about in airplanes. So this is airplanes, this is subsurface, and this is on the surface. So this strategy has us looking hard at that. In terms of unmanned airplanes, as you know, we have a validated demand for our U-class system, which is CVN ISR, but it also has with it survivable and possesses a strike capability. That demand has been validated, and we're moving forward with that.
Yeah, and I noticed, Admiral Michel, that the the President's budget does not have any money for UAVs. Are you working with the Navy, vaulting off their work and their systems and the application of their systems to the Coast Guard?
Sir, we've been all in with the Navy on unmanned aerial systems for things that might be useful to the Coast Guard. Some of the Navy systems are a little bit too high-end for us, but certainly in the areas, shipborne systems like Fire Scout or Scan Eagle are the smaller ones, and we've operated a number of those systems off Coast Guard cutters. From a Coast Guard perspective on the unmanned aerial system, extremely interested for the same reasons that the Navy is. You know, optimal sensor capability, extending the range of the ship, very attractive. You know, whether those would be land-based or sea-based, or whether they should be small and cheap or higher-end and more capable. Really, the Coast Guard's evaluating all that because we've got to make sure that whatever investment we make there is a wise one. But the Navy has been, and the Marine Corps for that matter, been completely open with us and let us be full participants, sir.
And I would hope you would do this at a little faster strategy, a little faster than the icebreakers. Finally, very quickly, the Navy is deploying a Poseidon UAV off the coast of California, probably for training purposes out of San Diego. Coast Guard might consider being in some sort of a coordinated arrangement with the Navy, since they'll be looking at the same water you are presently unable to see. So I just, if you'll look into that and come back to me with the potential that it might have between the two forces.
Yes, sir, we'll do that.
Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Hunter is recognized for any final questions he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one quick question, General. What do you do when it comes to logistics right now? Do they change at all with this new plan? Meaning the amphibious logistics, having stuff everywhere for when we're everywhere?
No, sir, no. It's the same strategy. You were out, but we talked a little bit about that, and certainly with both the two squadrons that we have that are out there with the MPS, and then, as you know, the MLP will bring that new capability of the selective offload and be able to bring those things ashore. But I think it kind of gets back to as you well know, enemy gets a vote, so it depends on really kind of what the situation is going to be. If it's on the low end of the ROMO or what's going to be in the high end. But we're definitely going to have and the Commandant's been working very hard for the last couple of months on wargaming some of the high-end stuff, the A2AD, and I'm sure you were briefed on it. But as we work through that, it will not change the fundamentals of the organization on how we do the logistics, but just a little bit on the distances and how we would protect it and how the sea base, and of course we're dependent on the other services to help us with that.
Mr. Courtney?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congressman Langevin, who was here a short time ago, had to leave, but he asked me if I could just forward one concern he had and or question he had. Again, I think as we all know, Jim does a lot of work in terms of cybersecurity with his subcommittee, and what he was curious about was that the strategy of all domain access, in terms of whether or not that extends to cybersecurity, electromagnetic spectrum, intelligence, command, control, other non-kinetic regimes. I was just wondering if any of you could talk about that a little bit for the record.
I'll talk about, excuse me, sir, from a Coast Guard perspective. That's a new term, and I think it's exactly the right term, and it captures those things beyond the physical domain, so ability to conduct cyber operations, electromagnetic spectrum, and that's very important to the Coast Guard to be able to do that. We're incredibly interconnected. We have our own networks. We want to be able to exploit or do whatever we need to do regarding adversaries' networks, and we have a whole regulated industry that we deal with, which has cyber challenges as well from a Coast Guard perspective. So we really have a prominent place in .mil, .gov, and .com, and I'm not aware of anybody else in the government that has that array of expertise and access. But the ability to conduct cyber operations, the ability to do the things that are necessary in cyberspace, as well as the non-physical domains, absolutely critical to Coast Guard missions. And we've got to build out a workforce and a capability in order to get at that. So thanks, sir.
Sir, quickly from our standpoint is the reason that this group together, as we were building the strategy, came up with the concept of all domain access was partly because of the cyberspace issue that we see in front of us. So it's absolutely central to the piece about access, because we're talking about in all domains. It doesn't have to be the physical space by any means. So we've taken this on board pretty hard. As you know, we have an information dominance corps that's tackling this. We have a Naval Academy has stood up their cyber center, so we can start at the very beginning in the training for this. But where it's really going to come to an end is point in the warfighting end of the business is the ability to have the access and use that domain to our advantage. First, we have to defend our systems, but we also have to be able to reach out and touch others, to be able to potentially degrade, to potentially disable, so that we're not constantly, as I said earlier, putting one of our things against another thing and losing that cost battle.
General Jim. Okay, and so again, Jim's sort of observation in the notes that he left here is that, at some point this is about standing up the human capital to be able to do that. And I mean, it sounds like you are trying to sort of form these centers of excellence at the different training facilities. And yes, sir.
Well, I'll just comment that Marine Forces Cyber they're all connected with each other, and of course to Cybercom, but. I think that kind of gets what you're talking about, sir, is making sure you have the human capital and the capabilities and the training, the right people to do those things that'll be this part of the all domain we talked about.
Thank you. Yield back.
And now I'd like to give each of you an opportunity, last comments that you have. And in doing that, could you also include a little follow-up to Mr. Courtney's question? It's one thing to stand these things up. How do we measure success in the non-kinetic domains? That's a little trickier for us, and if you'd include that in your summation. And Admiral Rochelle, we're going to start with you since everybody slaughtered your name today. And thank you so much once again for being here.
Well, thanks for giving the opportunity for me to be here. I think having the 3 sea services in front of you is really the message that I want to convey here, is that your sea services are working together on a daily basis. We have folks who work in each other's commands. We do operations together on a daily basis, whether in the physical domain or whether in the cyber domain. So the taxpayer gets a huge benefit from its investment in all 3 sea services because we're interoperable. We face similar, same challenges, and we work together on a daily basis in a very cooperative manner. So that's the one takeaway. I know we focused a lot on Coast Guard acquisitions. I don't want to, we had our discussions regarding that, but your Coast Guard is ready. Commandant reports that your Coast Guard is ready today. We're concerned about the risks that we're taking, particularly with aging equipment, but your Coast Guard is semper paratus, and I can report that to you today. Issue on cyber, I appreciate your comment, sir. This is a workforce issue. I don't think it's going to be, regardless of whatever whiz-bang equipment, we're either going to win or lose on this based on our people and being able to train and retain those high-quality people that are going to be necessary to conduct the cyber operations that we need in order to make the nation successful. Boy, measuring success in the non-kinetic realm is a lot harder in many ways. But as a Coast Guardsman, most of our end games are not smoking holes in the ground. They are law enforcement actions or regulatory actions or dealing with resilience and being able to rebuild infrastructure and different things like that. So the Coast Guard's comfortable with trying to measure success in non-kinetic solutions, but it's going to be very difficult. What I would say is our strategies typically, if we can defend ourselves, make sure that we conduct our operations in whatever areas we are, and then be able to protect the American people and our other stakeholders at an adequate level, that's probably the ultimate measure of success in most of the non-kinetic areas where I operate, and that would include cyber.
General?
Yes, sir. Let me answer your last question first about how do you measure success. It's more than just being able to keep your C2 systems up and running and be able to command and control and do the things that you want to do. But you have to be able to have those, as Admiral Michelle had just mentioned, how we're going to make sure we have people in there that are monitoring those types of things. But it's going to be very, very difficult to find out. You're only going to find out if you failed within those cybers. But all of us, I know all the services are working very, very hard on that. And the other part, the only thing I would comment about your other question was that everybody in this room manages risk. And we started about a year ago with Expeditionary Force 21, Commandant's Planning Guidance a couple of months. And as I mentioned to you before, we've already kind of moved out on making sure that we're doing all the experimentation and we're working those things to operationalize this strategy. Unfortunately, we don't have a forecast on what the budgets are going to be and how they're going to. We only plan for those. But the basic, as I mentioned, the basic tenets of this strategy, whether it's EF-21, CS-21, or the Commandant's Planning Guidance, sir, I'll assure you that we are working to make sure those tenets stay the same, and that's being ready when this nation is least ready, being forward deployed, forward engaged, building trust, working all those issues, and being the 911 force that you expect us to be. And there's no doubt about that. Whatever funding we end up with, we will execute our mission.
General, thank you. And Admiral Dunnigan, we'll let you have the last word.
Thank you, sir. I'll start with getting at the hardest question you gave us, which was how do we measure success in that domain? It's very difficult. We are working, and it's not one service that's working on this. As you know, Admiral Rogers and Cyber Command are working with all of us as we move forward to sort that out. In the near term, it's cyber hygiene and making sure that we have that piece right, that we have the basic things that we need to be doing as a service. In the longer term, though, it gets beyond that. When we are working and acquiring our systems, we have to acquire them with this in mind as we go forward. And one of the metrics needs to be that has to be one of the things we're looking at as we go along, and it is, but it'll need to continue to be. It wasn't necessarily one of the things in mind for some of the older systems that we've bought, so we have to bear that in mind. But it's going to be difficult, and I don't think that it's going to be easy. And in closing, I think I can speak for all of us when I say we're very proud of the strategy that the 3 services put together. A lot of work went into it. but we're equally proud of the game plan we have for moving forward to put it, to continue to put it and implement it and make sure that we can execute this strategy. And we look forward to working with this committee and the rest of Congress as we do that.
Thank you all for being here today. Thanks for the work you've done, and please communicate to your staffs and the people that work with you how much we appreciate the jobs that they've done. And with that, we're adjourned.